Okay, first video that I want to make, one of my favorite topics of fishing. Actually, I think it's one of the most important decisions that you can make, is fishing line. And so I'm going to break down the three types of line that there is, and then I'm going to dissect the deeper level of lines, lures they apply to, things that impact your fishing, help you land more fish, etc. And all this is in my own experience. I've been fishing tournaments and bass fishing on ponds, lakes, creeks, since, as far back as I can possibly remember. So anyway, so let's get into it. There's three types of line. There is monofilament, there is braid, and there is fluorocarbon. Okay, the three differences between all of those is this: braid floats and does not stretch. Monofilament floats and stretches. Fluorocarbon doesn't stretch, or stretches just a little bit, but let's just say it doesn't stretch. Fluorocarbon doesn't stretch and it sinks. So that's the starting point of the three differences in the three types of line that you'll use. Now, depending on the line that you use is going to depend on a bunch of different factors. It's going to depend. Literally, it's going to depend on the weather. It's going to depend on the depth you're fishing, the type of lure you're fishing, the weight of the lure that you're fishing. Are you fishing the type of technique? Are you fishing power or finesse? All of those make an extreme difference in what you're wanting to throw. So, for example, I like to throw on my topwater baits. If I'm throwing a whopper plopper, a buzz bait, any fast-moving bait on the top of the water that has something like a treble hook or a really sticky hook where you're moving that fast, fish kind of blow up on it, and you go to set the hook, and that thing pops out of their mouth. I'm using monofilament. Other people might use braid. I don't care what other people are using. I'm telling you that I'm using monofilament, and here's why. One, it floats, so it performs better on the top of the water. If it's choppy and there's waves, you don't want a line that's sinking and kind of catching the water. The other reason is if I'm sitting here reeling and that lure is moving, fish comes up and bites it, and I, like anybody does, when you have a topwater blow up, you jerk that hook and that lure right out of their mouth, and the fish don't really have a chance to grab it before it pulls out. I think the monofilament, in my opinion, because it has stretch, they grab, you go to set the hook, there's a little bit of a delay, half second, quarter of a second, whatever it is, that those fish can grab that lure before you set that hook, because that line stretches, has a little bit of give to it. When it comes to something like a jig or a shaky head or a finesse presentation, especially a finesse presentation, I'm going to do something like fluorocarbon, or even especially a crankbait. If you're throwing anything but if you're throwing anything but fluorocarbon with a crankbait, you're throwing it wrong, and here's why. I can take a Bandit 200 or a Bandit 300 that run anywhere from 8 to 12, 15 feet or whatever it is. If you're throwing a Bandit, let's just say you're throwing a Bandit 300 and on 12-pound fluorocarbon or 10-pound fluorocarbon, whatever it is, or I'm sorry, on 10-pound monofilament or 12-pound monofilament, whatever it is, that thing's going to fight two factors. It's going to fight the fact that line diameter is a little bit wider with that monofilament, and then it's also going to fight the fact that monofilament floats. So as it's wanting to dive deeper, that monofilament is pulling it up just a little bit. Obviously, it's not yanking it through the water column, but it's going to prevent its maximum diving depth. However, you throw something like fluorocarbon, it sinks, and that line diameter, the line's just a little bit more denser. It's going to let it slice through the water, and it's going to help that crankbait dive an extra foot or a foot and a half. And if you throw a lot of crankbaits, or maybe you don't, you're like, oh, crankbaits are a little over, throw it with the right line, I promise you. And if you spend even an extra foot or two on your casts, right? If you're in a tournament, you spend an extra foot or two on your casts on the bottom because it dove actually faster and they got to spend more time every cast. You compound that over, I don't even know how many casts you throw in a tournament, 300 casts, 200 casts. That could be like a mile. I mean, seriously, a mile of shoreline or that much more that you're actually fishing. It could equate to another 25 casts. And so if you're fishing tournaments or things like that, that is a really important factor in my opinion. Braid, I'm going to use braid for things like topwater frogs, or anytime, let's just say it's a buzz bait and I want to use monofilament, but I know that I'm slinging that thing up in some really nasty stuff. I'm going to be pulling fish out of the back of, bringing it through some really nasty cover. I might want to use braid in that sense. But for the most part, braid, topwater frogs especially. But for the most part, I don't throw to straight braid that often. At least here in Oklahoma, I don't really have it. Now, I've went down to Texas, fished Rayburn. I've had braid, different setups when you're really kind of punching mats and things like that, where you really got to, fish gets hung up and stuff like that. No problem. Totally get that. So those are just some different scenarios, and I could even go a little bit deeper on that. But for the most part, that's kind of what you want to think about whenever you're choosing your line between fluoro, monofilament, or braid. And again, braid floats and has no stretch. Monofilament floats and stretches. Fluorocarbon doesn't stretch and sinks. One other thing to add to that, if you're throwing something like a jig, let me say that one other benefit to throwing a jig on fluorocarbon, your hook sets don't need to be as hard. I've spent a lot of time where I'm throwing monofilament. I started out throwing monofilament because it was something cheaper. I actually used to throw this right here, and this is really good line. I'm not saying it's not, but I started to have a ton better hookups, tons more hookups, and honestly more bites in my opinion, because I was having better bottom contact with fluorocarbon. I'd throw Seaguar Red Label for all of my fluorocarbon. People with that throw Invisex or Sunline or whatever will probably talk crap about that. That's totally fine. I just throw this because it's, I think, the most cost-efficient fluorocarbon to actually throw. And then I have some stuff, and I'll do a separate video over it, but fluorocarbon can last a really long time. And so in my opinion, if you know how to take care of fluorocarbon, it'll save you a ton of money. And I know how to take care of it during the day while it's fishing, when you get home, how to store it. I have a whole little routine that I do before storing my rods away. I even at the boat ramp, if I'm putting up my rods in the rod locker, I don't ever just go straight there into the rod locker. I have a whole thing that I'll do. So anyways, back to my point though, with fluorocarbon, flipping and pitching, fishing a jig, fishing a shaky head, like I said, fishing a crankbait, because it doesn't have stretch, that hook set really pounds a hook home. When you have a little bit of give on it and you're trying to really pound through, if you're flipping something, you have a big heavy hook, big heavy line, and you go to set the hook with monofilament, if you tie monofilament to that, think about it. You set the hook and that line is going to go yeet and stretch out. It might not punch that fish where it needs to in its mouth, or as hard as it needs to in the mouth. Now, if you reel down and you're able to absolutely rip on one, yeah, you're going to set the hook every time with this. But there's times when you're fishing, you look to your left or whatever, or you got your rod tip a little bit high because you're bringing it over a bush, and you can't get a full swinging hook set. That's when your line matters. That is when your line absolutely matters. With fluorocarbon though, because it has no stretch, I can even from here to here, I mean that hook in a fish's mouth is jumping right into the top of its mouth. And so you're going to have a lot better hook sets with very thin wire hooks. A thin wire hook is just bink, and I mean that thing pokes right through. Heavy hooks, even a small hook set, one where you didn't get a bunch of power behind it because maybe you had your rod out here while you were dragging it, whatever it is, you're just going to have a lot better hookups. The reason that I wouldn't go, someone might go, okay, well, why wouldn't you use braid on everything? It's solid, you can't break it, and all these things, because they can see it. They can see it, and the other thing with braid is it's really affected by the wind. So I can throw, stiffer fluorocarbon that's kind of biting through the wind, and I'm sitting there fishing in the wind. You'll see with braid, whenever you slack the line, that line gets a huge loop as that wind blows it. And that makes it really hard to do a kind of a specific technique with. Whenever you're chunking and winding a heavy whopper plopper or buzz bait or whatever and running it through, that's not a big deal. But it's hard to have some technique and give a lure the right presentation while just using braid. So that's my opinion on it. Again, I could go a little bit deeper, but I won't. I'll keep it kind of right there. I think that's pretty surface level. So anyways, hope you guys liked it. If you have any questions, I don't know, feel free to reach out, comment, or